It's Tuesday, the 9th of November 2021. Welcome to Fear and Greed, the business podcast that sets you up for a successful day. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Morning, Michael.
A huge day of corporate deals as investors look to park their money. That's our main story. Also today, travel stocks take off, new data shows the effectiveness of vaccinations, and big birds, big controversy. Then stay listening for Sean's chat to Blackmore's CEO, Alastair Symington. But first, Sean, it was a mad Monday with several large deals being announced from the likes of BHP, Sydney Airport, and Gina Rinehart, the country's richest person.
Sure was. Some we knew about, some we didn't, but let's start with the biggest. The board of Sydney Airport said it will recommend the $23.6 billion cash offer by a consortium of mostly superannuation funds led by IFM investors. Throw in debt, Michael, and the offer's worth around $32 billion. It's not quite there yet. The bid will face competition watchdog scrutiny, given IFM investors holds stakes in 9 other Australian airports, including Melbourne and Brisbane. Now, under current laws, no one investor can own more than 15% of 2 major Australian airports. They still need to get through that. It also needs to get through European Union authorities and Australia's Foreign Investment Review Board. That's deal number 1. Number 2, BHP has sold its Queensland metallurgical coal mines to Indonesian-backed Stanmore for about $1.6 billion. Number 3, the Board of Australian Pharmaceutical Industries gave their support to the $764 million bid for the drug retailer and wholesaler by Wesfarmers. Remember, late last week, the alternative bidder, Sigma Pharmaceuticals, pulled out. Where are we up to? Number 4, South Korean giant POSCO International offered almost $1 billion for Gas Junior Cenex. It's the 4th bid by POSCO, but this one is slightly different. Gina Rinehart's Hancock Energy may join forces with POSCO. That certainly gives another dimension and an Australian flavour, which the Foreign Investment Review Board will like. Number 5, Aristocrat Leisure, which has bid around $920 million for UK-based Playtech, said another potential bidder had emerged. And there are also a couple of relatively small deals. Peter Warren Automotive said it would buy Victorian dealership Penfold Motor Group for $104 million. And NIB Holdings said it will acquire Kiwi Insurance for $43 million. That's 7 deals in one day. Not bad.
It was only yesterday that we were lamenting the fact that we'd gone a few days without a deal, so it looks like the deals are going to keep on coming.
Yes, there's plenty of money sloshing around, that's for sure. With interest rates so low, companies can afford to go into debt and hopefully buy assets that provide a decent return. And we know the super funds are really hungry for ways to invest. It's the same reason why we've seen so many large share buybacks recently and some big initial public offerings, including GQG Partners, Judo and SiteMinder yesterday, which had a very good first day.
So much going on. How did markets perform yesterday?
Throughout all that, the market actually ended down. The S&P ASX 200 finished just a touch lower at 7,452 points. Westpac bounced back, having fallen sharply last week. You might remember that. ANZ went ex-dividend and lost about 1.6%. REA Group, it lost most of its gains from last Friday. Xero was one of the worst performers, down nearly 5%. Now, Woodside Petroleum led the oil and gas companies higher, up 3% on the back of higher commodity prices. The gold companies did well. St Barbara was up 5%, Perseus Mining jumped 4.3%, and Northern Star Resources rose 3.5%. That's what happens when the price of the precious metal increases. But the sector I want to highlight is the travel stocks. The travel companies had a really good day yesterday following some big jumps in US travel stocks. Expedia, many of us would have used that one, trades on Wall Street, and over the weekend its share price rose 16% to a near record level after it beat earnings forecasts. Now, that's pretty incredible given we're still in a pandemic. We're not quite out of that yet, and it's hitting a record level. The cruise lines and big American airline stocks have also done really well. Yesterday on the local market, Flight Centre jumped nearly 6%, Webjet was up nearly 5%, and Qantas rose more than 4%.
Impressive. So how about overseas markets? What's happened overnight?
There wasn't a lot going on in early afternoon trading. The major indices on Wall Street are flat. There wasn't much going on in European markets either, really. Most of those bourses were flat as well. The Aussie dollar is back above 74 US cents, and both oil and gold prices were higher over the past 24 hours.
We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, there's plenty of stories around this morning. The Financial Review is holding its annual infrastructure conference. Plenty of interesting speakers in the one spot.
Yes, that's the great thing about conferences, I think. You get a selection of views. Some of the more interesting ones from the Financial Review conference yesterday included Virgin CEO Jane Herdlicker, who said the airline industry will be back to normal by next winter, and Virgin wants to recapture 1/3 of the domestic market. That's where it was before it went broke at the beginning of COVID. Virgin staff are coming back to work and the industry is ramping up. She also suggested foreigners in Australia temporarily should be allowed to become citizens to boost the economy. There are currently around 1.6 million temporary visa holders in Australia. It's unlikely to happen, but it's a novel idea. Jane Hunter, the boss of Tritium, which provides charging stations for electric vehicles, predicted that EVs will be cheaper than internal combustion vehicles by 2025. Prices of electric vehicles are falling as the cost of batteries, which is one of the most expensive components of a vehicle, drops. That'll be interesting to see if that one works out. Scott Charlton, the boss of toll road group Transurban, said traffic levels in Sydney and Brisbane were back to pre-COVID levels. Now, any of us driving around either of those two cities in peak hour know that's definitely the case. Mr. Charlton said while not everyone was heading into the office, there was hesitancy around using public transport, and of course, that put more cars on the road. And Urban Infrastructure Minister Paul Fletcher said the new Western Sydney Airport could trigger the arrival of new budget airlines. More competition, lower prices. I like it. The new airport will open up slots for airlines, significantly boosting capacity.
Sean, that prediction about electric vehicles being cheaper than internal combustion vehicles by 2025, that's extraordinary. That's only 4 years away.
Yeah, that's right. Batteries are definitely one of the big costs. The problem in Australia, of course, is that there's not enough charging stations. So we might end up finding that the infrastructure is lagging the actual sales.
Yeah, fascinating one, that one. All right, what's happening on the COVID front?
Well, Prime Minister Scott Morrison said the government will be very cautious about whether children under 11 years of age can be vaccinated. He said studies in the United States may not be large enough to guide Australian authorities. He also said Western Australian Premier Mark McGowan's decision to keep his state borders closed until at least 90% of the population was vaccinated would do more harm than good. Meanwhile, New South Wales Health released research yesterday that shows the Delta outbreak was largely concentrated on unvaccinated people. Of the near 62,000 people who became infected with Delta, only about 6% were vaccinated, while 63%, 10 times that, were unvaccinated. The rest had had only one jab or their status was unknown. That was about 21% of the study. An unvaccinated person was 16 times more likely to end up in intensive care or die, according to the figures. The moral of the story, Michael, vaccination works.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what about the numbers yesterday?
There are 187 new COVID cases in New South Wales and 7 deaths. As of yesterday morning, 89.8% of people over the age of 16 in the state were fully vaccinated. 69% of 12 to 15-year-olds were fully vaccinated. In Victoria, the state government said it will use rapid antigen tests on unvaccinated school students, allowing students to return to the classrooms after 7 days of isolation rather than 14. The state recorded 1,126 new cases yesterday and 5 deaths. Its full vaccination rate is now more than 84%, and the ACT recorded 12 new cases, and it has a 95% full vaccination rate.
95%, that is impressive. Now, Sean, Stockland, one of the country's biggest real estate investment trusts, is selling off some of its shopping centres and retirement assets.
Yes, CEO Tarun Gupta said Stockland will sell between $1 and $2 billion worth of assets in those areas and use the money to buy up residential property, including expanding its residential development business. Now, Stockland is already the country's largest residential developer, and it wants to build apartments. It's betting that once we fully emerge from COVID, immigration levels will rise back towards 200,000 a year, and the apartment market will bounce back from its recent poor showing. And Stockland wants to be much more innovative about how it goes in residential property, making a bigger commitment to affordable housing options, including build-to-rent and land leasing.
It wasn't the only big property announcement yesterday, though, was it?
True. A large Hong Kong real estate investment trust has spent $500 million to buy stakes in Sydney's Queen Victoria building, the Strand Arcade and the galleries. The Hong Kong REIT bought the assets off Singaporean investor GIC. The other major owner is ASX-listed Vicinity Centres.
Okay, Sean, what's making headlines in today's news media?
Well, Michael, the Financial Review is reporting that Afterpay is working on plans to add Westpac mortgages and other loans to its product range next year as the Buy Now Pay Later group expands into savings products with the launch of its new money app. And media outlets are reporting the testimony of a former KPMG partner, Brendan Lyon, who alleges he was humiliated, bullied and discredited in meetings with New South Wales Treasury over a report he did into the State Rail Corporation. It came after he refused to rewrite the independent report, questioning the State Treasury's advice to government.
Running through some of the other stories around today, the Prime Minister announced plans to undertake a feasibility study around developing green hydrogen export facilities at the Port of Newcastle in the New South Wales Hunter Valley. He has dismissed the need for taxes to achieve net zero carbon emissions, reiterating that the government was relying on new technologies like hydrogen.
The number of new online job listings has pushed beyond 250,000 for the first time in 13 years. The data from the National Skills Commission shows that job ads jumped by more than 8% last month. It's good news for the unemployed, obviously, though not necessarily for the business community, who may be forced to pay up for staff.
Corporate law firm Gaydon said that all its lawyers will receive a 15% wage increase. Not bad. There have previously been 10% increases at other firms, including Gilbert and Tobin and Thomson Geer. The lawyers, it seems, are doing well.
They certainly are. Former Victorian Government Minister Adam Somyurek was in front of the state's IBAC inquiry yesterday, saying when he joined Labor in 1995, the left and right factions of the party were branch stacking, hammer and tong, is how he put it. He was pretty colourful, having a go at former Federal Party leader Bill Shorten, former Federal Minister Stephen Conroy, and alleging Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews could have been involved.
And some good news for the plane spotters, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I am one of them. According to The Australian, a Qantas A380 will return to Australian skies today, flying into Sydney from Germany, where the aircraft underwent a landing gear update. During the pandemic, Qantas's 12 A380s were mothballed and 10 will return to service. What's the key overseas news this morning, Sean?
While the COVID news in Australia keeps improving, case numbers in New Zealand keep rising. There were 190 cases yesterday, a new daily record. Around 3/4 of the population have now been fully vaccinated. Notwithstanding the case numbers, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said she will ease restrictions, particularly in Auckland, which has been hardest hit, by the end of the month. The borders between the United States and Canada and the US and Mexico reopened overnight, more than 18 months after they were closed. There's extra flights and personnel at border crossings to handle the expected surge in coming weeks. Michael, I was trying not to mention this one, but I can't help it. Elon Musk, over the weekend, opened a poll on Twitter asking whether he should sell more than $20 billion worth of Tesla shares, 20 billion with a B. That's about 10% of his holding. The poll came back with 3.5 million responses, of which 58% said yes. So apparently, that's what Mr. Musk is going to do, triggering a tax liability of about $2 billion US. Do you ever feel, Michael, that sometimes Mr. Musk is just taking the mickey?
I reckon this is just what billionaires do when they're bored.
Perhaps. And finally, Michael, Big Bird is causing something of a furore in the United States. The Sesame Street character tweeted that he'd gotten his COVID vaccination just days after US health authorities approved the Pfizer shot for children aged 5 to 11. Conservative politicians weren't impressed, with Texas Senator Ted Cruz tweeting that it was government propaganda for 5-year-olds. Fox News jumped in on the debate, no surprises, with one host calling Big Bird evil. Apparently Big Bird, who's been aged 6 for about 5 decades, has been pro-vaccination since the early 1970s. He and Mr. Snuffleupagus, my personal favourite, were talking about measles vaccines as early as 1972. So there you go.
Yeah, just can't help sticking his beak in, can he? That is a fantastic story. Thank you, Sean. Now, up next is the Daily Interview, and today is speaking to Alastair Symington, the CEO of Blackmores.
It was a great conversation. We talked about everything from the friction at board level, and there's plenty of that at Blackmores, right through to the future of health products and what the company wants to do overseas.
Yeah, it's a fascinating chat. That is up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Tuesday, the 9th of November, 2021. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook, and sign up for our free daily newsletter at fearandgreed.com.au. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.